The lights dim and the camera cuts straight to the elegant facade of La Belle Rêverie, the city's most exclusive Michelin-starred dining room. In the golden glow of street lamps, our hero Alexandra Monroe, a visionary founder of a multi-million-dollar tech empire, steps out of her sleek black sedan, clip of a valet's eyes narrowing. A firm voice off-screen, "I'm sorry, ma'am. We can't seat you tonight." No explanation, no apology, just a cold-clipped refusal. The score swells. A deep, urgent voiceover. Why would a globally celebrated CEO be turned away from her own reservation? Within seconds, you're on the edge of your seat, your heart racing because you know this isn't just dinner. It's a battle for dignity. If you believe in justice and passion, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and let us know in the comments. What would you do? Stay tuned. This is only the beginning. She had planned this evening for weeks. Monroe, a woman whose name appears on Forbes and Fortune lists, whose company's stock soared to record highs, still had a soft spot for candlelight dinners and the quiet luxury of fine wine. Yet tonight she found herself staring at the velvet curtain of La Belle Rêverie's entrance, barred by smiling hosts whose discreet whispers carried the weight of discrimination. 2 minutes ago, she had walked through these doors like any other distinguished guest, tailored suit. Designer heels, a calm confidence in her stride. The maitre d' extended his hand, clipboard in arm, then paused. He checked his list again and cleared his throat. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Monroe, but we have no record of your reservation." He glanced at her black Amex card before turning away. The hostess closed the gap behind him. "Perhaps you should try a different night." Inside, soft violin chords danced. Outside, the world seemed to stop. Lex's pulse thundered as she processed the humiliation of being uninvited. This wasn't a simple oversight. She'd confirmed twice by phone, received email confirmations, even secured the private chef's signature menu. She was more than a guest, she was a patron of this city's finest. Yet here she was, stranded in the night air, the glow of chandeliers just beyond reach. She forced a smile, voice steady. "I believe there's been a mistake. Please double-check your book." The maitre d' flicked through pages, then sighed. "No mistake, I'm afraid." With a curt nod, he signaled the hostess to escort her away. Lex felt the familiar tug of anger and disbelief, two forces she had learned to channel into power. As the hostess led her to the car, Lex's mind raced, not with confusion, but with strategy. In the mere 60 seconds until the car door closed, she was already plotting the next move. She would not let this slide. Her inner voice, calm but resolute, whispered what she would later tell her board. "They didn't just deny me a seat. They denied my humanity." The sedan glided into motion, headlights cutting through the night. Behind her, La Belle Rêverie's golden arches faded. Ahead, the city stretched out, full of opportunity and risk. Lex tapped her phone, a quick message to her executive assistant. Within 10 seconds, the words flew off her fingertips. "Confirm all event reservations for next month. I want every venue to know my name." 50 seconds later, another text, "Call my general counsel. I want options on this tonight." In that moment, Lex Monroe shifted from affronted guest to CEO in control. For decades, she had fought for board seats, for equal pay, for respect in rooms where she was the only person of color. She knew how to turn obstacles into leverage. Her mind ticked through contacts, the mayor's office, the city's finest lifestyle magazines, the high-net-worth clients she'd brought to this restaurant before. Each was a card she could play. By the time the car arrived at her penthouse, 20 minutes had not yet passed since the initial refusal. The city lights glimmered against the dusk. Lex stood before her floor-to-ceiling window, poised like a statue. Behind her, the illuminated skyline seemed to bow in acknowledgement. She inhaled deeply, then turned to her assistant, who waited in the foyer. "Draft a public statement," Lex said, voice cool. "I'll address it at 8 o'clock. And send apologies to every guest scheduled for next month's gala at La Belle Rêverie. Our event has been relocated." Her assistant hesitated. "But no buts." Lex replied, ice in her tone. "Make sure they understand why." And just like that, the narrative flipped. Lex would own the story, define the terms, and force an institution to answer. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. This was about preserving her dignity and that of every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong. In the quiet of her office, Lex drafted the statement. Each word was deliberate. Last night, I was denied service at La Belle Rêverie. No explanation, no apology. Discrimination has no place in our city nor in our homes. She paused, then continued. Therefore, our gala scheduled for July 15th will move to a venue that honors every guest equally. She clicked send. Copies went to local press, to her board, and anonymously to the restaurant's owner. At that instant, the game changed. Headlines would follow, and with them conversations about power race and accountability. But in these opening 100 words, the stage was set, injustice confronted by swift, unyielding action. And our audience, those who remember when a single stand could shift the tides of history, leaned closer, waiting for what came. Dawn broke over the skyline like a promise of reckoning. Lex Monroe sat behind the polished mahogany desk in her corner office, sunlight glinting off the rows of awards that lined the shelves. She leaned forward, reviewing her company's quarterly report one last time before the world woke up. This was no ordinary morning briefing. It was the calm before the storm she had set into motion. Monroe Innovations wasn't just another tech firm. Under Lex's leadership, it had grown from a two-person startup in her garage to a global powerhouse employing thousands with annual revenues north of $500 million. Her flagship product, a predictive analytics platform, helped Fortune 500 companies anticipate market shifts and optimize strategies. In boardrooms from New York to Tokyo, she was known as the driving force behind breakthroughs in AI-driven decision-making. Yet even with her sterling reputation, the sting of last night's rebuff lingered in her mind. She summoned her executive team into the glass-walled conference room. As each key player filed in, her CFO, James Carter legal chief Anna Patel, and PR director Marisol Diaz, they offered nods of solidarity. The air was charged. Lex began without preamble. By now you've seen my statement about La Belle Rêverie. I want updates on venue alternatives, security measures for our guests, and a PR strategy that turns this into a conversation about systemic change, not just one restaurant's mistake. James clicked open a slide deck on the large screen. It outlined 3 potential venues: a historic opera house, a riverside pavilion owned by a local nonprofit, and a boutique art gallery that championed underrepresented artists. Each had capacity, catering, and accessibility details. Lex listened, her eyes narrowing as she assessed. Anna tapped her tablet, confirming legal considerations, deposit recoveries, contract liabilities, and potential defamation risks if any parties chose to retaliate. Marisol's phone buzzed with the first of many incoming media inquiries. An email from the city's top lifestyle magazine asked for an exclusive quote. A CNN producer wanted an interview within the hour. A local food blog demanded the full story behind her canceled gala. Marisol scrolled through and met Lex's gaze. Shall I confirm the interview or hold off until your on-camera statement? Lex paused. She wasn't rushing headlong into the hurricane. She was the eye of it. Schedule the interview for 3 hours from now, she said. That gives us time to finalize the new venue and reach out to our guests. I want them to hear both sides from the boardroom and the showroom. As the team departed to execute orders, Lex slipped out into the hallway. She passed by staff portraits, her silhouette among them, a testament to perseverance, and paused at a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. There, nestled between glass towers, she saw La Belle Rêverie's starched awnings, a ghostly reminder of last night's injustice. She allowed herself a breath, then turned away. Justice wasn't about dwelling on the wrong. It was about engineering the right. 2 hours later, Lex stood in front of the venue. She had chosen an Art Deco theater that had once hosted silent films and now boasted state-of-the-art acoustics. Outside workers installed banners bearing her company logo and the tagline, "Equality at every table." She surveyed the activity caterers lining up, chafing dishes, lighting technicians, testing rigs, ushers rehearsing greeting protocols. Everything was on schedule. Back inside the theater's green room, Lex ran through her speaking notes. Tonight she would stand before 500 guests, including key investors, local dignitaries, and members of the press. But she wasn't here merely to celebrate her company's successes. She was here to make a statement, not about vengeance, but about accountability and the power of one decisive action to spark widespread change. At noon, Lex's assistant delivered a stack of newspaper clippings. The city's major outlets had splashed her story across front pages. CEO denied dinner a stand for dignity. Read the bold headline in the morning paper. Social media feeds buzzed with hashtags #LexStands. Tall, #dining, while black, #cancel label. Some posts lamented how this kind of bias still existed in 2025. Others applauded Monroe's quick response. A few critics questioned whether she was overreacting, but those voices were drowning in a tide of support. Lex skimmed through quotes from community leaders and activists praising her stance. Reverend Douglas Hayes called it a clarion call to every institution that clings to outdated attitudes. A prominent civil rights attorney penned an op-ed, "When wealth and power intersect with prejudice, it takes bold leaders like Lex Monroe to wield their influence for justice." Lex allowed a small smile. This was precisely the conversation she wanted to ignite. At 2:30, she stepped into the press conference room prepared for the media scrum. Cameras flashed as she adjusted the microphone. Ahead sat rows of reporters, their recorders poised like outstretched hands. She cleared her throat and began, "Yesterday evening, I experienced what no individual, regardless of race status or profession, should ever face: a denial of service based solely on who I am." Her voice was steady, her tone measured but unyielding. She recounted the events at Belle Rêverie, the dismissive treatment and the hastily issued statement canceling her gala. Then she outlined her reasons: the need for institutions to examine their biases, to commit to genuine inclusivity, and to recognize that respect is not a privilege but a right. She paused, letting her words sink in. "This is not about a single evening," she continued. "It's about a culture that too often turns a blind eye to discrimination cloaked in hospitality. Tonight, we gather in a venue that welcomes all, a venue that practices the values we claim to uphold. And moving forward, Monroe Innovations will partner exclusively with establishments committed to equity, transparency, and respect." Applause rippled through the room. As she fielded questions, one reporter asked about the potential financial impact of severing ties with a high-profile restaurant. Lex leaned forward, gaze unwavering. "Some may ask if this will cost us. I ask instead, what price do we place on dignity? If standing up for what's right costs a few $1,000s in deposits, then that's a price I'm more than willing to pay." Her answer resonated. The room buzzed with admiration. By late afternoon, the board convened a brief session via video call. Lex updated her directors on the day's developments, venue, secured press-handled social momentum building. She presented a plan for a series of workshops and partnerships to foster diversity training across the hospitality sector, a legacy project born from last night's humiliation. The board members, many of whom had initially been skeptical of such a high-profile reaction, now voiced enthusiastic support. "This could redefine corporate responsibility," one remarked. Another predicted a ripple effect that would encourage other CEOs to take similar stands. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the final preparations wrapped up, Lex stepped onto the theater stage to rehearse. Dressed in a sleek black dress that mirrored her confidence, she paced slowly, articulating every line. The stage lights bathed her in warmth. The empty seats awaited the evening's guests, but in this quiet moment she envisioned the collective energy that would fill the room, people united by a shared belief in justice. 20 minutes of rehearsal turned into an hour. A production assistant signaled it was time to clear the stage. Lex took a final deep breath, centering herself. Then, as the theater doors opened and the first guests arrived, she moved off stage, blending into the crowd. She engaged with early arrivals, thanking the nonprofit that owned the theater, sharing a private laugh with Anna Patel about last night's absurdity, and offering a warm embrace to a longtime mentor who had flown in at her invitation. Throughout the evening, conversations buzzed, not about the past humiliation, but about the future, a future where leaders refused to tolerate discrimination at any level. Lex glided through the crowd, exuding authority and grace. The gala proceeded flawlessly, every detail a testament to her vision. When the time came for her keynote address, the spotlight found her at center stage. As she began to speak, the audience hung on her every word. She recounted the injustice, the immediate action, and the broader lessons for businesses and communities. Her voice rose, then softened, then rose again like the tide driven by an unrelenting wind. By the time she finished, there was a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, voices whispered of the moment's electrifying power. And in that singular evening, less than 24 hours after her walk of indignity, Lex Monroe had transformed a personal slight into a public triumph. She had not only canceled one event, she had launched a movement. The theater lights dimmed, but the glow from that stage would linger far beyond the night. The evening air still carried a hint of warmth when Alexandra Lex Monroe arrived at La Belle Rêverie. Street lamps cast a soft glow on its ornate entrance, and through the arched windows candlelight flickered like golden embers. Lex stepped forward, voice calm yet firm, as she handed over her confirmation printout and ID. The maitre d', a well-groomed man in a tuxedo, scanned the paper, then paused, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Ms. Monroe," he said, voice perfectly polite yet hollow. "I see your reservation here, but unfortunately we can't honor it tonight." Right at the hostess stand, time seemed to slow. The soft strains of a piano drifted from inside. Waitstaff glided past, carrying trays of champagne. Yet for Lex, the moment felt suspended, her name on the page, her card in hand and still shut out. She inhaled, steadying herself. "I called twice to confirm," she replied evenly. "Perhaps there's been an error." He bowed his head slightly, eyes flickering away. "No error," he repeated, folding the printout and sliding it across the polished marble. "I'm sorry." That single phrase hung in the air like a challenge. A waiter paused nearby, glancing at Lex with barely concealed curiosity. The hostess shifted her posture, arms tightening around her clipboard. Outside, a black sedan idled its engine, humming patiently. Inside, the world of fine dining carried on without her. Lex's pulse hammered as she assessed the scene. Every element conspired to tell her she didn't belong: the velvet rope dividing sidewalk from candlelit interior, the string quartet's lilting melody that felt like mockery, the murmured side conversations between staff. Behind her, the valet raised an eyebrow in solidarity, but duty held him at his post. By the time her assistant's text came through, Lex were live on Twitter: "Black CEO denied at top restaurant." Should we respond now? She instinctively pocketed her phone. She refused to let panic or indignation dictate her next move. Instead, she tilted her chin, voice low but resonant. "Thank you for your time," she said to the maitre d'. "Please let your manager know I'd like to speak with them." He hesitated, then waved a hand toward a side corridor. Lex followed. The hallway was narrow, lit by sconces that cast long shadows. At the end, a door marked "Manager" stood ajar. She entered and found a younger woman's sleek hair, bespoke suit, sitting behind a desk stacked with reservation logs. "Miss Monroe," the manager said, rising with a forced smile. "I'm Isabelle Dupont. I apologize for the inconvenience, but we're fully booked." Lex held Dupont's gaze. "Fully booked," she echoed quietly. "Yet at the same time, you somehow lost my reservation." She leaned forward, fingertips resting on the desk. "I've brought 50 VIPs here before. We booked the private dining room 6 months ago. I confirmed last week." Isabel swallowed. "I understand, but policy is policy." She tapped a finger on her desktop calendar. "I'm afraid we have no availability." Lex allowed a slow exhale, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Policy shouldn't be applied selectively." She pulled out her card again. "Are you refusing service because of my name, my address, or because I'm the only black person here tonight?" Silence settled. The manager's composure flickered. A bead of sweat formed at her temple. "That's not how we operate," she finally said, but her tone lacked conviction. At that moment, a sommelier approached, carrying a decanter of vintage Bordeaux. He set it on a side table with a gentle clink. His gaze flickered between Lex and Dupont, unreadable. The pianist's trill crescendoed through the walls as if underscoring the tension. Lex breathed in the wine's smoky aroma, an old habit she'd cultivated when negotiating million-dollar deals. She straightened. "Then let me demonstrate," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Please serve this wine to the guests you deem worthy, and I will be on my way." Isabel's hand hovered above the telephone. She dialed, then paused. Lex could almost hear her heartbeat. In that pregnant silence, Lex's phone buzzed again. Hashtags trending nationally. Media wants live feed. But she remained still, a calm force amid the storm. Finally, Isabel hung up. She looked at Lex, eyes ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It won't happen again." Lex offered a small nod. "Thank you," she said. Then she pivoted on her heel and walked out into the night. The valet opened her car door wordlessly. Lex slid in without another word. Inside the sedan, she checked her watch. Exactly 11 minutes had passed since arrival. In her mind, she replayed every detail of the encounter. The maitre d's clipped apology, the hostess's averted gaze, the manager's trembling hand. Each moment etched itself into her strategy. By the time the car pulled away, the restaurant's marquee reflected on the wet pavement. Lex retrieved her phone and tapped out a brief memo to her legal team. Gather all reservation records, emails, texts. Prepare documentation for a discrimination claim. Then another message PR team draft statement about tonight. A CEO denied service, a reminder that bias wears many faces. Her assistant pinged back. Understood. What about the gala guests? Lex paused, gaze fixed on the receding glow of La Belle Rêverie. She typed, Move gala. Notify all vendors. I want every venue in this city aware of what happened. The car sped through city streets, headlights washing over billboards advertising luxury brands. Lex's mind pivoted from the insult to the opportunity. This was no longer about dinner, it was about systemic change, about shifting the narrative so that every institution recognized you can't treat someone like an afterthought and expect no consequences. Within 20 minutes, she was back in her penthouse loft, her reflection greeting her from the floor-to-ceiling windows. She inhaled deeply, then strode to her desk. There, beneath the glow of her desktop lamp, she opened a new document titled Gala Relocation and Equity Initiative. She began typing, Monroe Innovation stands for progress, for inclusion, for the belief that no person, regardless of race, gender, or status, should ever be made to feel unwelcome. Effective immediately, we will... Her words flowed with purpose, each sentence building the framework for her next move. She drafted emails to city officials, to venue operators, to every board member of hospitality associations. She outlined a plan for diversity training, a review of reservation protocols, and a public registry of establishments committed to unbiased service. As she wrote, the earlier sting of rejection transformed into a burning resolve. This incident, small though it may seem against the backdrop of her vast achievements, symbolized the countless indignities faced by people of color every day. And Lex Monroe, CEO, leader, changemaker, would not let it stand. When she finally pressed, Save the clock, read 9:45 p.m. 30 minutes had slipped by since her departure from La Belle Rêverie. She leaned back, fingers steepled, as the city lights danced below. Part 3 of her unfolding saga was complete. The detailed moment of injustice laid bare, every nuance recorded, every slight catalogued. Now, with evidence in hand and allies at the ready, she prepared to escalate the fight, turning a single denial of service into a catalyst for widespread transformation. In the silent hum of her office, she allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile. The storm was approaching, and she stood at its center, unshaken and unwavering. Lex watched the cursor blink on her screen as she structured the first public memorandum under the heading Equity and Hospitality, conscious that every word would be scrutinized. The soft hum of the air conditioner and the distant city sirens were the only sounds beyond her own keystrokes. She outlined the supply chain of accountability from maitre d's and hostesses to venue owners and corporate headquarters, and mapped out a timeline for her own demands, a full apology from La Belle Rêverie, compensation for reputational harm, and a binding agreement to participate in diversity training. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Anna Patel, her general counsel. Anna's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of excitement. I've pulled all reservation logs text threads with the manager and video from the valet's dash cam. We can build a rock-solid claim. I'll have a draft by tomorrow. Lex nodded, even though Anna couldn't see her. Excellent. Make sure we have a statement that's firm but measured. There's no need to be vindictive. She next contacted Marisol Diaz, her PR director, who was burning the midnight oil in a dimly lit war room at headquarters. Marisol's messages poured in social listening metrics, showing spikes in engagement screenshots of supportive tweets and a short list of journalists eager for deeper interviews. We should consider a white paper release on systemic bias in fine dining, Marisol suggested. It will frame this as more than a personal grievance. Lex agreed. Let's do it. Collaborate with our data team to gather nationwide reservation complaint statistics. Outside, the city lights shimmered on rain-slick streets. Inside, Lex tapped into another facet of her network. She summoned a trusted investigative reporter who had broken major civil rights stories. A secure text read, Can we meet tomorrow morning? I have a lead you'll want. The reporter confirmed. Lex closed her eyes momentarily, picturing how the story would unfold, hard-hitting exposés paired with human narratives of everyday diners turned away because of the color of their skin. She leaned back and glanced at the stack of wedding invitations and gala RSVPs on her desk, testaments to her world of privilege. Each was now a potential stage to amplify her cause. She drafted an email to her board. Propose hosting next year's annual shareholders' dinner at a community center that employs formerly incarcerated youth as servers. It felt poetic, a celebration of financial success, giving back to those most marginalized. At 11:37 p.m., Lex finally saved her work. The room was quiet except for her own steady breathing. This incident, she reflected, mirrored countless indignities faced by people of color every day. Microaggressions and outright rebuffs that accumulate like hidden debts on one's dignity. She would not allow this one to be swept under the rug. Before logging off, she opened her calendar and scheduled a video call with Belle Rêverie's owner for the following afternoon. No small talk, no pleasantries, just a clear stake in the ground. Then she picked up her phone one last time and messaged her mentor, a retired judge and civil rights pioneer. I need your advice tomorrow. Thank you for always guiding me. A moment later, the judge replied with 3 simple words. I'm proud of you. Lex closed her laptop. The clock glowed 11:45 p.m. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving a hushed calm. She stood by her window looking down at the sleeping city restaurants, bars, and theaters, all places where stories unfolded, where people gathered, where inclusion should reign. Tonight, a single dinner reservation refusal had ignited a cascade of action. In the quiet of her penthouse, Lex allowed herself a thin, determined smile. The groundwork was laid, legal strategy and motion media narrative shaping up, and her own voice ready to resonate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the owner's response, further media scrutiny, and the crucial gala relocation execution. But for now, she owned this moment, a black CEO, turning injustice into momentum, preparing to strike at the heart of systemic bias. And as the first rays of dawn crept across the horizon, she felt the surge of purpose that would carry her into the next chapter of her fight for equity. The sun had barely crested the skyline when Alexandra Monroe stepped onto the balcony of her penthouse, coffee in hand, and watched the city stir awake. Last night's adrenaline drafting legal demands, rallying her team, shaping a narrative, had given way to a focused determination. Now it was time for the next move, the initial reaction, the opening dialogue that would set the tone for everything to come. Inside, Lex sank into the high-backed leather chair at her desk, inhaled the rich aroma of freshly brewed roast, and dialed the number for Belle Rêverie's owner. The line rang twice before a measured male voice answered, Ms. Monroe, thank you for calling. His tone was polite, but there was an undercurrent of unease. Lex allowed a brief pause. She knew the power of silence. Then, in a voice that was calm yet carried a clear edge of authority, she began, Good morning, Mr. Sinclair. I'd like to discuss what happened last night. As he stammered an apology, Lex listened without interruption. She let the discomfort build in her mind. Images of last night's velvet rope and hushed whispers played on a loop. Finally, after Sinclair's rehearsed expression of regret, she spoke with measured confidence. I appreciate your apology, but an apology alone won't prevent a repeat. I've outlined 3 concrete steps I expect before noon tomorrow: a formal public statement of regret, compensation for the expenses incurred relocating our gala, and a binding commitment to institute anti-bias training for every member of your staff. Silence stretched. Lex could almost see Sinclair counting the cost in his head. At length, he cleared his throat. I understand. I'll confer with my team and have a response by noon. Lex nodded to the empty room. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you. She hung up and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The first volley cast the stakes now clearly drawn. As she closed her laptop, her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. 9:00 a.m. call with community partners. She grabbed her coat and slipped into the elevator, descending to the street. Within minutes, she was in a sleek black SUV making her way to Trinity House, a local nonprofit that provided resources for small business owners of color. In the back seat, she reviewed the talking points for today's meeting, framing her personal experience as a catalyst for broader systemic change. At Trinity House, Lex was greeted by familiar faces, entrepreneurs, who had once pitched to her in boardrooms, community leaders who had applauded her last year when she funded a scholarship for underserved youth. She moved through the sunlit lobby with ease, smiling and exchanging pleasantries before settling into a conference room painted in warm earth tones. Around the table sat 8 individuals, restaurateurs, hotel managers, and neighborhood activists. "I'm here today because what happened to me last night isn't unique." Lex began, her voice measured but impassioned. "It's part of a pattern of bias that persists across our city's hospitality industry." She recounted the details: her canceled reservation, the dismissive staff, the velvet rope barrier that spoke louder than any words. "But I believe we can change this. I'm committing Monroe Innovation's resources to collaborate with Trinity House to develop a certification program, Equitable Hospitality." Heads nodded as she outlined the program's basics: mystery audits to identify discriminatory practices, tailored training modules for frontline staff, and an annual seal of approval for venues that met rigorous standards. A restaurateur raised a hand. "Will this cost small businesses extra?" Lex shook her head. "We'll subsidize initial audits, and our team will work pro bono in exchange for the credibility that comes with the certification." The room buzzed with energy. This was a solution-oriented conversation, the pivot from reaction to action. By late morning, Lex was back in her office, fielding the incoming response from Sinclair. His email was terse but conciliatory. They would release a public apology by 11:30, cover all gala-related costs, and begin mandatory training next month. Lex forwarded the draft apology to Anna Patel for final legal review, noting a few adjustments: stronger language around recognizing institutional bias, and a commitment to publish annual progress reports. Her counsel approved. She hit send and watched as the restaurant's statement went live on their website and social media channels. At 11:00 a.m., she moved to the next item, the white paper project. She convened her data analytics team over video call. Charts and graphs filled her screen: statistics on reservation denials, trends by zip code, and price point demographic breakdowns. Lex guided the discussion, probing for insights. What regions show the highest disparity? How do complaint rates correlate with Yelp reviews? We need a narrative that's both data-driven and human. The team chimed in with enthusiasm. By noon, they had a robust outline, an executive summary, regional case studies, interviews with affected patrons, and recommendations for industry-wide policy reforms. Lex tasked Marisol with coordinating design and distribution. She envisioned a slick PDF widely circulated that would land on every hospitality executive's desk. As the clock struck 1, Lex paused for a moment in her office's soft leather armchair. Her gaze drifted to the skyline restaurants and hotels peppered the horizon, each representing potential allies or adversaries. She sipped her coffee, now lukewarm, and considered the day's progress: a firm public stance, an emerging certification program, a powerful data report in the works. She felt the familiar rush of momentum that followed decisive action. Her phone buzzed again, an invitation to speak at a city council hearing on business equity next week. She accepted immediately. Every step was building a narrative larger than one denied dinner reservation. It was about rewriting the rules. By mid-afternoon, she checked in with her gala relocation task force. The new venue, a riverside pavilion run by a social enterprise, was confirmed. Caterers were briefed, invitations resent, and security protocols updated. The team had even arranged for live streaming cameras, ensuring that guests who couldn't attend in person could still witness the event. Lex approved the details with a quick nod. At 4:30 p.m., she settled into a live stream interview with a national news outlet. As cameras came live, she greeted the anchor with a composed smile. When asked why she had acted so swiftly, Lex leaned slightly forward and said, "Because justice delayed is justice denied. My experience last night was an affront not just to me, but to every person who's ever been told they don't belong. When you have the platform, you must use it." Her words reverberated across frames, reaching viewers in living rooms from coast to coast. The interview wrapped, and Lex found herself alone again in her office. The afternoon sun cast long shadows. She exhaled, reflecting on the initial reaction that morning, from confronting the restaurant owner to rallying community partners and mobilizing data-driven advocacy. Each conversation had been a calculated move, balancing firmness with collaboration, anger with purpose. As dusk approached, her assistant reminded her of the evening's rehearsal for the gala speech. Lex stood, smoothed her tailored blazer, and headed to the theater. Inside, stagehands adjusted spotlights while the band ran through the opening chords of her introduction. She moved among them, offering words of encouragement and checking the teleprompter's cues. Backstage, she took a quiet moment in front of a full-length mirror. The woman staring back at her was Serene Steely, a leader who had turned a personal slight into a rallying cry for equity. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered almost to herself, "This is only the beginning." With that, she stepped onto the stage for a final sound check. The empty seats before her held the promise of hundreds of expectant faces tomorrow night. Faces she would face with the authority of someone who had not only reacted to injustice, but had taken the first definitive steps towards systemic change. And as the lights dimmed and the stage curtains stirred, Lex Monroe's initial reaction had already rippled into a movement. The following morning, a ripple of unease ran through the opulent boardroom of La Belle Rêverie. Chandelier crystals tinkled softly as the executive team gathered around the glass-topped table, their expressions taut. The owner, Charles Sinclair, sat at the head reviewing the draft apology Lex Monroe had requested. It glared at him from his laptop screen language, condemning institutional bias, a pledge to fund diversity training, and an offer to compensate Monroe Innovations in full. Sinclair tapped the desk. "We agreed to this," he said, voice low, though his jaw clenched. Yet the public reaction, it's brutal. His communications director, a sharply suited woman named Verity Clark, shifted in her chair. "Sir, the headlines are condemning us. Yelp volumes spiked overnight. Review bombing has begun. Our reservations are down 20%. He exhaled, eyes flicking to the window. Sunset light painted the Senside facade in fragile gold. "We owe her," he murmured, "but they're calling for more. Now they want the chef fired, the general manager dismissed, even a boycott of all our sister restaurants." Across the city, Lex Monroe watched these developments unfold on her morning news feed. She sipped her espresso in her home office, the words scrolling by in real time. Lex Monroe forces La Belle Rêverie to kneel. Black CEO's stand reverberates worldwide. Her phone buzzed with another alert, this time from a hospitality industry group condemning Sinclair's establishment. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, but her gaze sharpened. This moment of triumph had its own danger. If they capitulated too fully, it could appear as an empty concession rather than genuine change. Back at the restaurant, Sinclair's team debated strategy. Verity raised a hand. "Charles, they're demanding public acknowledgement of the chef's racial indifference. Should we—" He cut her off. "No. We will not scapegoat our employees. We will honor our commitments, but insist that this is a systemic issue, not the failing of one person." He leaned forward. "Issue the apology as is. Then we need to launch a press conference to articulate our long-term vision, how we'll partner with Monroe Innovations on that equity and hospitality initiative." Verity smiled thinly. "A joint statement. That could work." Meanwhile, Lex's legal team notified her of Sinclair's signed agreement. They had 10 days to review diversity protocols and file progress reports. She forwarded the news to Marisol with a curt note, "Good. Now let's keep the pressure on. This is about action, not PR fluff." By afternoon, the restaurant's public apology went live, accompanied by a video statement from Sinclair. He stood before the camera in the softly lit dining room, bowing his head to Miss Lex Monroe. "And to every individual who has ever felt unwelcome in our establishment, we apologize unreservedly." His tone was earnest, but social media pundits dissected every syllable. Was it sincere or scripted? Lex watched each clip, each tweet, weighing her next move. Tension escalated at Monroe Innovations as well. Her phone vibrated with messages from board members uneasy about the media frenzy. One director texted, "Are you sure we shouldn't let this blow over?" Another emailed, investors concerned about potential backlash. "Should we distance ourselves?" Lex paused before responding. She tapped out a firm reply. "This is exactly why we cannot back down. If we retreat now, we betray the very principles we stand for." That evening, as the city's lights blinked on, she convened a late-night strategy meeting via video link with Anna Patel and Marisol Diaz. Anna reported that several hospitality groups were drafting formal inquiries about joining the Equity in Hospitality certification. Marisol shared mock-ups of a microsite where consumers could search for certified venues. Engagement is skyrocketing, Marisol said, but we're also seeing backlash threads, some calling this woke overreach. Lex leaned into the camera, voice steady. Let them debate. Our work is measured in tangible results. Who trains their staff, who publishes data, who changes policy. We'll let the numbers speak. Back at La Belle Rêverie, the mood behind closed doors remained fraught. The head chef, Antoine Marchand, confronted Sinclair in the kitchen offices. They want my head, he said, wiping flour from his hands. You promised you wouldn't fire me over something I didn't do. Sinclair placed a hand on his shoulder. You won't lose your job, Antoine, but you will lead the training program alongside Lex's team. You will tell your story where you failed to see bias and how you'll do better. Antoine nodded, uncertainty and relief mingling in his gaze. He realized that the restaurant's survival now hinged on genuine transformation, not damage control. Across town, Monroe Innovation's diversity training module took shape. Lex herself recorded a personal introduction, a 90-second video in which she spoke directly to hospitality staff. When I walked through your doors, she said, I expected welcome. Instead, I encountered exclusion. Imagine the faces of every guest you refuse. What message does that send? Hospitality is about treating every person as honored. That begins here. Her words resonated in the recording studio's empty control room. When she finished, her voice lingered in the silence, an unspoken challenge to anyone listening. On day 3 of the saga, a major hospitality association invited Lex to speak at their annual conference in Rome. The invitation letter mentioned her as a disruptor whose stand has shaken the very foundations of fine dining. Lex considered accepting this was a chance to globalize the conversation, but held off. She needed to see action at home first. By the end of the week, La Belle Rêverie's reservations had stabilized thanks to Quinn's Pavilion and the certified venues filling the gap. Patrons who backed Monroe's movement flocked to newly approved restaurants, eager for a service experience rooted in equity. Customer reviews highlighted courtesy, attentiveness, and respect testimonials that undercut La Belle's earlier shortcomings and spotlighted the certification's value. In her penthouse, Lex watched a montage of Clips diners praising equitable hospitality chefs undergoing sensitivity workshops, restaurant staff reciting Monroe Innovation's code of conduct. Her phone buzzed with a message from Reverend Hayes. You've done more this week than most leaders do in a lifetime. Lex reflected on the escalation of tension from a single refusal at a velvet rope to a citywide movement redefining service. There had been threats of lawsuits, investor jitters, social media storms, and internal conflicts at the restaurant. Yet through each challenge, she'd held fast to her principles: demand accountability, demand change, and let no institution hide behind tradition when tradition perpetuated prejudice. As dusk turned to night, she prepared for the gala rehearsal once more. The theater lights were brighter now, the stage more crowded with crew testing the new live stream integration. She reviewed her speech one last time, emphasizing not her own ordeal, but the collective imperative to see every guest as worthy. Stepping into the wings, Lex felt the weight of expectation, but also the crest of accomplishment. The crescendo of tension had forged a path forward. Not only would La Belle Rêverie emerge transformed, but countless other venues would follow suit. And when she finally strode into the spotlight tomorrow night, it wouldn't just be a CEO speaking. It would be every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong, hearing her affirm that their place at the table was not negotiable. Just 10 minutes had passed since Lex Monroe's final rehearsal, but in her mind the clock was already ticking toward the moment of her greatest move. Backstage lights glowed softly against the velvet curtains as she slipped away from the hum of technicians and slipped into a quiet corridor lined with mirrors. In their reflection, she saw the composed leader she had been all day and the strategist who never let emotion outweigh calculation. It was time to shift from defense to offense. Her phone buzzed with a single message: "Manager, ready for your call." Lex tapped the contact labeled G Counsel and held the line. Anna Patel's voice came through calm and precise. Lex, I've reviewed Sinclair's public apology. It meets our specifications for tone and timing, but I've drafted your next communication, a notice of intent to file a discrimination claim if their follow-through isn't verifiable by our 10-day deadline. Lex nodded to no one in particular, her voice low yet steely. Send it now. Let them know we mean business beyond press statements. She ended the call and joined a small cluster of aides in the theater's green room, illuminated by a single overhead bulb. Her executive assistant handed her a fresh cup of espresso. Lex took a deliberate sip, savoring the bitter heat. Around her, the gala staff moved with hushed urgency, florists arranging centerpieces, ushers practicing their welcoming smiles, audio engineers tweaking microphones. All this precision for one night's celebration. Yet Lex's mind was already 3 steps ahead, tomorrow's headlines, the ripple effect, through every corporate board, the court filings that would anchor her demands in law. Picking up her tablet, she opened a secure folder labeled Twist Strategy. The first document was a timeline 6:00 p.m. Gala opens. 6:15 p.m. Opening remarks. 6:30 p.m. Project launch. 7:00 p.m. Release of white paper data. Below it, a bullet-free narrative outline described how guests would be guided through a brief video montage showing real stories of discrimination, each clip lasting no more than 20 seconds preceding her address. This was not simply a fundraiser. It was a statement of purpose, an invitation for every attendee to become an agent of change. Her assistant touched her sleeve. The judge is on the line. Lex closed the tablet and paced toward an alcove curtained off from the main stage. She tapped the video icon and the face of Justice Eleanor Brooks appeared framed by oak bookshelves. Lex offered a respectful nod. Your Honor, thank you for agreeing to speak with me at short notice. The retired judge's voice was warm but firm. Lex, I read your statement. You're charting new territory combining corporate influence with civil rights advocacy. Lex's heart lifted at the endorsement. I need your guidance. Sinclair's team seems ready to pay lip service, but I want substantive, enforceable commitments. I plan to serve notice during the gala, announce our intention to litigate if they're not fully compliant. Is that too aggressive on a stage like this? Justice Brooks paused, then replied, Timing is everything. If you unfold your legal stance within a celebratory setting, you risk overshadowing the gala's purpose. However, framing it as a demonstrative commitment, a symbolic reveal can galvanize support and underscore your message. Introduce it as a declaration of accountability. Then follow up with formal filings. Lex closed her eyes briefly and assimilated the advice. Understood. I'll introduce it as part of tonight's program, no detail inundation, just the core principle and a promise of action. She scribbled a note. Declare declaration of accountability at 6:45 p.m. File notice of intent by midnight. Brooks offered a final benediction. You're making history. Lex, proceed thoughtfully, but proceed. After the call, Lex rejoined her team. She addressed them quietly, but with unmistakable authority. At 6:45, I will unveil our declaration of accountability. It will name La Belle Rêverie and any other establishment that fails our standards. Then by midnight, our legal team will file the notice of intent. Make sure the broadcast feed is cued to cut to on-site cameras. Every guest, every viewer at home must hear it unfiltered. Her PR director, Marisol Diaz, nodded eagerly. We've prepared a visually compelling slide bold typography on a black background. Your voiceover then transitioned to our headline, Corporate Justice in 45 Minutes. Lex allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Perfect. Let's do it. Next, she reached for her phone and called her board chair, Marcus Bennett. As the image flickered to life, she greeted him with her signature confidence. Marcus, tonight I'll deliver a dual message celebration of progress and the necessity of accountability. I expect full board support when we convene tomorrow to authorize the legal filings. Marcus's face, illuminated by the glow of his desktop, expressed unwavering solidarity. We have your back, Lex. This could reshape corporate social responsibility standards. Every connection she touched tightened the network of influence she wielded. The gala team continued final preparations around her centerpieces of white lilies symbolizing purity of intent, printed programs listing the evening's agenda, silent auction items donated by minority-owned businesses. Each detail was a thread in Lex's tapestry of action. As 5:50 p.m. approached, she donned the emerald green gown chosen for this pivotal night, its deep hue a nod to renewal and growth. A stylist pinned the final strand of hair and applied subtle makeup that would catch the stage lights without obscuring her expression. Lex caught her reflection poised, resolute, ready. She inhaled, centering herself in the calm before the storm. At precisely 600 p.m., the theater doors opened and guests began to file in. Lex watched from the wings as board members, dignitaries, and press mingled, some greeting her with admiration, others observing with curiosity. She felt the electricity in the room, the collective anticipation of an audience primed for more than champagne and small talk. When the time came for her opening remarks, Lex took the stage to sustained applause. She welcomed everyone, shared gratitude, and briefly recounted the events that had brought them here. Then at 6:35, she transitioned into the program's second segment, the white paper launch. The lights dimmed and 3 large screens flickered to life behind her, projecting graphs, quotes, and headlines illustrating the systemic nature of hospitality discrimination. Her voice rose above the hush. Today, we're not just celebrating Monroe Innovation's achievements. We're shining a light on a reality too often ignored, that exclusion persists in the places meant to welcome us. The screens shifted to black and her words echoed through the auditorium. Then 10 minutes later. Lex paused, allowing the Vietnamese phrase, just 10 minutes later, to hang in the air, a reminder of time's swift current. A soft spotlight illuminated her as the slides changed to reveal the bold title, Declaration of Accountability. She clicked a remote and the statement appeared. We hold La Belle Rêverie in every venue that fails to honor equitable treatment to a standard of immediate, verifiable action. We will file legal notice by midnight unless evidence of substantive compliance is provided. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. The live feed zoomed in on Lex's face, capturing the intensity of her gaze. In that moment, she had bridged ceremony and confrontation, celebration and challenge. Cameras panned to executives from La Belle Rêverie, seated in the front row, some shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Around the room, murmurs mixed with gasps. The splash of champagne glasses paused mid-toast. Lex maintained her poise. This declaration isn't about adversaries, she continued. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that every person, no matter who they are, can enter a dining room, a hotel lobby, or any space and be met with dignity. Tonight, we measure progress not in speeches, but in actions. The screens faded to her company logo as applause erupted. Flashbulbs popped, journalists rushed to record the statement verbatim, and social media lit up with live reactions. In less than 10 minutes, she had executed the twist she'd meticulously prepared, transforming a personal story of discrimination into a public mandate for systemic change. Backstage, her team exchanged triumphant smiles. Marisol mouthed, "You nailed it." Anna Patel gave a discreet thumbs up. Lex offered them a nod of gratitude, then stepped back onto the stage to continue her speech. This time, the tone warmer, the celebration genuine, buoyed by the power of her unyielding stand. As the program flowed into the silent auction and networking gatherings, the ripple effects of the twist began to spread. Texts from industry leaders pledging to review their own policies, tweets from attendees pledging support, live news anchors replaying her bold proclamation. Lex moved among her guests, gracious but guarded, every handshake a subtle reminder of her message. Tonight the twist was no longer just her story, it had become a clarion call. And 10 minutes after the celebration's opening, the world knew that Alexandra Monroe's brand of justice moved at the speed of resolve. The stage was set for the final act, the legal filings, the verifiable commitments, and the lasting legacy of a CEO who refused to let injustice go unanswered. The moment arrived just as the chandeliers glowed with the muted warmth of 100 flickering bulbs. Alexandra Lex Monroe stood center stage, bathed in spotlight, every eye in the theater fixed on her. Behind her, the Declaration of Accountability. Bold, unyielding, still lingered on the screens. She let the applause subside, allowing a hush to gather like fog. In that pregnant silence, her voice carried clear and strong. Tonight, we celebrate progress, but progress without enforcement is nothing more than a promise unkept. She paused. The weight of her gaze traveled across the room over board members, journalists, community leaders, and even the representatives from La Belle Rêverie, who sat as uneasy witnesses to her verdict. In the quiet, the faint hum of air conditioning felt like the suspense before a storm. Lex drew a breath and continued, each word deliberate. I stand here not simply as a CEO who was refused a table, but as a leader committed to action. And action, by definition, demands consequences. At that precise moment, the theater's side doors swung open, and two figures stepped into view. Monroe Innovation's General Counsel, Anna Patel, and the company's head of security, Malik Reyes. In Patel's hand was a sealed envelope stamped with the Monroe crest. In Reyes's was a thin stack of legal documents. A subtle ripple ran through the audience. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Lex reached back and accepted the envelope, her fingers brushing Patel's briefly in silent thanks. Then, voice unwavering, she announced, "We have served La Belle Rêverie with a notice of intent to file a discrimination claim. You have until midnight to demonstrate full compliance with our Declaration of Accountability. A public apology, indemnification for our gala relocation, and verifiable institution-wide bias training. Failing that, we will file suit and hold every level of management legally responsible." Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. Cameras snapped furiously, capturing every crease of determination on Lex's face. A hush fell again as she allowed her words to sink in. She let the silence stretch for 5 heartbeats, long enough for everyone present to comprehend that this was more than posturing. It was a legal ultimatum delivered with theatrical precision. Then, as if on cue, the screens behind her flickered into motion footage of La Belle Rêverie. Staff moving through last night's velvet rope, the maitre d' closing the reservation book on her name, the manager's averted gaze. The montage played silently, each frame underscored by the swell of the theater's ambient score. The audience watched rapt as the injustice unfolded once more. Only now it was framed as evidence, a prelude to accountability. When the final clip faded, Lex stepped forward, voice softer but no less formidable. "You've seen what happened. You know what it felt like. Now you will witness what it means to face consequences." She held Patel's gaze, and Patel, with quiet precision, handed a copy of the notice to a runner in a Monroe Innovations blazer. The runner slipped from the stage like a shadow bound for the headquarters of La Belle Rêverie and the inboxes of every major news outlet. Before the murmurs could swell into questions, Lex raised a hand. "I will not waste time on debate. Tonight I fire the manager who refused me service." Gasps rippled again, this time tinged with shock. A spotlight swung to illuminate an empty chair near the front row, symbolizing the absence of the manager, Isabelle Dupont. In that moment, the vacancy spoke louder than words, accountability manifested in real time. A second runner emerged, this one bearing letters revoking the positions of the maitre d' and the head host, executive letters that declared immediate termination for cause. The papers were served even before the audience's ears fully registered the titles. Lex continued without pause. "And I suspend every member of La Belle Rêverie's leadership team from their roles until they can prove their commitment in practice, not just in statement. This is not vengeance, it is justice." Silence thundered through the hall. Even the orchestra that had risen to play cue music stood still, bats of anticipation hanging in the air. Lex's voice dropped to a near whisper, drawing every listener close. "Let tonight's action resonate beyond these walls. Let it echo in every dining room, every check-in desk, every velvet rope in the world. Because when the powerful are confronted with their prejudice, they must face consequences that match their privilege." She stepped back, allowing the reality of her words to settle. Then, to punctuate the moment, she signaled to the band. A single piano note chimed, followed by the rising chords of an orchestral swell, an audible exclamation point to her declaration. The theater erupted in sustained applause, some standing, many wiping tears, all moved by the spectacle of a leader refusing to tolerate injustice. In the midst of the ovation, Lex slipped off stage, blending into the dimly lit wings. There, Patel and Reyes met her with respectful nods. Patel whispered, "Documents filed and sent. They've received everything." Reyes added quietly, "Security teams are on alert in case there's backlash outside." Lex placed a hand on each of their shoulders. "Thank you. Tonight we didn't just confront bias, we dismantled it." Moments later, she returned to the stage to conclude the gala. Her final words were measured and warm. "Tonight we have proven that justice can move faster than prejudice. We have shown that dignity cannot be denied without repercussion, and we have demonstrated that a single stand can spark a movement. Let us leave here not simply inspired, but committed to our own institutions, our own communities, and our own selves to uphold these standards. The work begins now. As she stepped away from the microphone, the audience rose in a standing ovation more thunderous than any other of the evening. Cameras panned to capture the standing rows, the tears, the applause, a living testament to the power of immediate, decisive action. Backstage, Lex exhaled deeply, heart still racing from the adrenaline. She had executed the twist in exactly the way she'd envisioned, public, unambiguous, and irrevocable. The legal filings would land at midnight. The terminations and suspensions would reverberate through Belle Rêverie's ranks, and the world would watch as one dinner refusal mushroomed into a watershed moment for corporate accountability. Later in her penthouse, as the city lights pulsed below, Lex reviewed real-time news alerts on her phone. Headlines blazed, CEO fires managers live on stage. Legal notice filed a new era of hospitality equity. Monroe's twist, dignity served, discrimination denied. She allowed herself a brief triumphant smile before closing her eyes and whispering into the quiet, "This is only the beginning." As dawn broke the next morning, Lex Monroe soaked in the sight of breaking headlines across every major outlet. The city's skyline glowed behind her as she scrolled through live updates. Manager ousted la Belle Rêverie in shock, legal notice signals new era in hospitality. Monroe's movement gains momentum. She absorbed each line not with triumphalism, but with a deliberate calm, knowing that true change would require more than a single dramatic moment on stage. Within hours, the ripples of her actions had become waves of transformation. At La Belle Rêverie, the newly vacant manager's office stood silent, its leather chair pushed back against the wall. A bulletin posted on the staff intranet announced an emergency town hall meeting, led by an external consultant asked to guide them through crisis and culture change. Chefs whispered in the kitchen about being drafted into sensitivity workshops. Servers studied emails outlining a zero-tolerance policy for bias. The general manager, once lauded for maintaining an elite reputation, now chaired a committee to draft the restaurant's first-ever equity charter. News crews gathered outside the restaurant's ornate entrance, their microphones poised for interviews. Local activists filled the sidewalk distributing flyers that praised Lex's decisive stand and called for other establishments to sign on to her equity and hospitality certification. Pedestrians paused photographing the scene, hashtags forming in real time, hashtag Monroe Effect, hashtag Table for All, hashtag Hospitality Justice. Across town, other fine dining venues began to reach out to Monroe Innovations, offering partnerships, invitations to the certification program, requests to co-host workshops, letters acknowledging the necessity of unbiased service. At Quinn's Pavilion, the riverside venue that had hosted Lex's relocated gala reservations, surged. Owner Elena Rodriguez reported a 50% uptick in bookings from word of mouth alone, and that was before any marketing push. She told the press, her voice thick with emotion. "We believed in this mission from the start. Tonight we're proud to show the world what true hospitality looks like." Meanwhile, in corporate boardrooms, Lex's colleagues at Monroe Innovations saw renewed energy. The board convened an emergency session to review the Equity and Hospitality White Paper and to vote on expanding the initiative company-wide. They approved a budget to fund mobile training units, deploy mystery diners in multiple cities, and provide microgrants to small businesses ready to reform their practices. The CFO, James Carter, noted that the initiative aligned perfectly with the company's values and could even generate new revenue streams as a certification body. He added, half-joking, "When you turn social justice into a business asset, you've really arrived." But not everyone greeted the upheaval with open arms. A well-known restaurant critic penned a scathing column likening Lex's approach to corporate overreach, warning that monopolizing morality could stifle the spontaneity that makes dining experiences unique. A hospitality trade journal published a survey showing 30% of independent restaurateurs felt threatened by large corporations dictating policy. Social media trolls mocked the idea of a diversity czar, while a fringe columnist declared we've moved from dining to dictating. Lex read these critiques carefully, acknowledging that backlash was the flip side of leadership. She drafted responses for her PR team, concise statements, emphasizing that the program valued both art and equity, that it supported small and large businesses alike, and that it was built on shared principles, not top-down mandates. She also reached out privately to a few critics, inviting them to the next workshop so they could see the program firsthand. "Critique me in full knowledge of the facts," she said. "I'm confident our approach speaks for itself." At City Hall Council member Diane Nguyen organized a hearing to discuss state-level legislation inspired by Monroe's actions. In a packed chamber, Lex testified alongside Reverend Douglas Hayes and the civil rights attorney who had written the op-ed lauding her stand. Each shared data personal stories and a vision for a hospitality code of conduct enforceable by law. Nguyen read excerpts from Monroe Innovation's white paper statistics showing a 20% reduction in discrimination complaints among certified venues in its first week. She declared, "This is proof that accountability and education work hand in hand." Backstage at the gala venue, Lex prepared to attend a panel on corporate responsibility. She paused to admire a display of postcards sent by patrons who had moved their own events to certified establishments. One card read, "Because of your stand, my mom finally felt safe dining out again." Another read, "My small bistro just got its seal. Thank you for keeping us honest." These messages reminded her that the true measure of success lay not in headlines, but in human lives restored. As evening descended, Lex returned to the theater for the gala's closing ceremony. The stage, framed by towering pillars of white lilies, felt different now, less like a platform for spectacle and more like an altar of accountability. When she stepped into the light, she no longer needed screens or legal filings to lend weight to her words. Her presence alone carried the authority of someone who had tested the system and commanded it to improve. She spoke quietly at first. "Last week I was turned away from a table. Today we've turned that refusal into a force for change." Her voice grew stronger. "But the work doesn't end here." She pointed gently toward the audience. "It continues in kitchens where chefs commit to see every guest as worthy, in reservation books where no name is unworthy of a seat, in every community where dignity must never be negotiable." When she finished, the theater erupted in applause once more. This time, the sound felt as much a vow as a celebration. Guests filed out carrying programs outlining next steps, QR codes linking to training schedules, and contact information for local certification coordinators. Outside, the night air was filled with conversations about expansion into new cities, about franchise chains brave enough to pilot bias audits, about partnerships with travel platforms to include equity ratings. Later, as Lex sat alone in her penthouse balcony, she reflected on the whirlwind of the past days. The cost of relocating a gala, the headlines, the lawsuits threatened and then resolved, all paled in comparison to the quiet moments, a server's grateful tear after her first sensitivity workshop, a restaurateur's handshake at the certification ceremony, a family of 4, 2 black parents and their daughters smiling as they walked past La Belle Rêverie, no longer feeling they needed to prove their worth. In the hush of the early morning, with the city's pulse slowing beneath her, Lex Monroe understood that consequences and commentary weren't mere epilogue. They were the bedrock of lasting change. She raised her glass toward the skyline, a silent toast to every ally, every skeptic converted, every soul uplifted by what had begun as one denied reservation, but had grown into a reckoning with bias itself. And as the lights of La Belle Rêverie twinkled in the distance, now bathed in the neon sign certified equitable after an overnight transformation, Lex closed her eyes, knowing this chapter's end was only the turning of a page. The story of justice, she thought, is never confined to a single night. It lives on in every moment when someone decides to stand to speak and to demand that a seat at the table be more than a gesture, it be a right. When the first rays of morning light crept through the tall windows of her penthouse, Alexandra Lex Monroe allowed herself a moment of stillness. Below, the city was waking to a new reality. A world in which hospitality had been redefined by a refusal to accept anything less than dignity for every guest. As she sipped her coffee, Lex reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A simple dinner reservation turned into a movement, a declaration of accountability that rippled through boardrooms and back to the kitchen floors of restaurants across the country. This evening, at the gala's closing ceremony, she would draw that journey to a close and extend the invitation to everyone watching to join in the next phase. By the time guests began to arrive at the theater, the air buzzed not just with excitement, but with purpose. Monroe Innovation's logo adorned banners at every entrance alongside the seal of the Equity and Hospitality certification. Servers wearing crisp aprons trained just days before offered champagne and smiles that carried genuine warmth. No velvet ropes, no whispered qualifications. Everyone was welcomed as equal. Lex found her seat among philanthropists, activists, and the entrepreneurs who had partnered with her on this mission. They exchanged nods and warm greetings, a shared pride shining in their eyes. In the center of the stage, the microphone stood ready, flanked by tall pillars of white lilies. A hush fell as the orchestra began a gentle overture. No grand fanfare this time, but a soft, hopeful melody that underscored what truly mattered. Connection, respect, community. When Lex rose, she let the applause subside before speaking. Her voice was steady, confident, but threaded with gratitude. She spoke first of the injustice she had faced the sting of exclusion at Belle Rêverie's entrance, and then of the actions that followed the statement of apology, the notice of intent, the display of immediate consequences. She reminded the audience how in just 45 minutes, a CEO had turned a personal slight into a catalyst for systemic change. But tonight, Lex continued, we celebrate not the drama of that moment, but the transformation it sparked. She paused, letting those words settle like embers of possibility. On the screens behind her images flickered the inaugural cohort of certified venues, smiling diners of every background, chefs, embracing new training, community members gathering in newfound fellowship. Each still frame felt like a testament to what could be achieved when one person refused to look the other way. She described the expansion of the certification program, how small family-owned bistros in the suburbs had reached out eager to join, how national hotel chains had begun pilot audits of their staffs, how through partnerships with travel apps, equity ratings would soon display alongside stars and guest reviews. Lex spoke of the policy proposals now circulating in state legislatures inspired by the data her team had collected. We have the roadmap, she told them. Now we need the commitment of every institution to follow it. Her gaze swept across the room, meeting eyes that reflected her own determination. Then, Lex shifted to a softer tone, addressing stories that had touched her most: a Black grandmother who could finally dine in peace, a young server who said they finally felt seen, a restaurateur who vowed to mentor other owners on bias awareness. She recounted how a letter arrived that morning from a community organizer. You gave us a seat at more than just a table. You gave us a voice. As the screens faded to black, Lex leaned forward, her voice resonating in the silence. Justice is not a one-night affair, she said. It is built brick by brick, conversation by conversation, action by action. Tonight we've laid another brick, but the structure we build must stand on the foundation of our ongoing commitment. She invited everyone to stand and pledge for themselves, for their businesses, for their communities, to uphold the principles of equity. In unison, hundreds rose hands raised or placed over hearts, a living mosaic of resolve. The moment felt sacred, as if the very walls of the theater absorbed their shared vow. When the applause finally rose, it was not for Lex Monroe alone, but for all who had chosen to join the movement. The orchestra swelled into a triumphant refrain as guests mingled, exchanging business cards and plans for collaboration fundraising dinners hosted at certified venues, diversity workshops co-led by Monroe Innovations, and local nonprofits and sponsorships for educational programs teaching hospitality as an act of genuine welcome. Backstage, Lex allowed herself a quiet smile. She watched through a small window as Belle Rêverie's owner, Charles Sinclair, approached the stage to offer a toast in partnership, a gesture of reconciliation and commitment to real change. It wasn't about absolution, it was about accountability made tangible. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of mutual respect passing between them. Later, as the night wound down, Lex stood alone on the empty stage. The lilies were still fresh, the lights dimmed to a soft glow. She spoke softly to the empty hall, imagining each seat filled with someone carrying this message forward. "Thank you," she said aloud, though there was no one there to hear. "This is for you." Returning to her penthouse, Lex reviewed the messages waiting for her: invites to speak at international forums, offers to fund scholarships, requests for mentorship from young leaders she'd never met. She replied with brevity and warmth, mindful of the work that still lay ahead. She had achieved more in a week than many would in a lifetime. Yet the journey toward a world where no one would ever face the sting of exclusion continued unabated. As the first light of dawn painted the sky, Lex stepped onto her balcony. The city below was waking again, but this time it would wake to a promise fulfilled and a promise renewed that in the world of hospitality and beyond, every person would be treated with the respect they inherently deserved.